Coming up on Southwest Florida in Focus, voters have just weeks to decide on a presidential pick. PBS's Frontline offers insight on both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. We speak with filmmaker Michael Kirk, whose new documentary reveals key moments shaping the lives of both candidates. That's next on WGCU. You're watching Southwest Florida in Focus. Coming up, the choice 2024, Harris versus Trump. PBS's Frontline investigates the lives and characters of Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. We sit down with the documentary's filmmakers to get his insights before you cast your vote. Plus, democracy in action. WGCU is there as immigrants take the oath and become new American citizens. Hear their stories of hope. And we'll tell you the amazing story of how an American flag crafted by Holocaust victims is now proudly on display in Southwest Florida. Hello, I'm Sandra Viktorova. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, we are just weeks away from the presidential election. Absentee ballots will show up in mailboxes soon. PBS's Frontline is helping voters make their decision. Right now, you can stream their documentary, The Choice 2024, Harris versus Trump.
This is a brand new presidential race.
In this historic election,
this is for Donald Trump a chance to go out the winner he must be.
Kamala Harris demands respect. If it's not given to her, she demands it.
The moments that shape their lives.
This woman who's pushed through everything that would tell her no.
He just was able to connect with people in a way that the typical politicians could not.
It's about the country that you want.
The choice could not be more stark.
I recently spoke with the documentary's award-winning filmmaker, Michael Kirk, to get his insight on both candidates. Michael Kirk joins us now. Thank you, Michael, for spending time with us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So this documentary looks at the events that shaped the two candidates, and what really struck me in looking at their childhood, their family life as teenagers, was that they truly came from two complete different worlds, as different as you can imagine. Any surprises? I mean, obviously you've been following both candidates, but any surprises for you?
It's always fascinating to mix the two lives together of the candidates. We've been doing this for a long, long time now, and they, in this particular case, it couldn't be starker. I think this may be the most different environments, families, outlooks on the world, locations. Is there anything more different than growing up in Jamaica, Queens, and just outside of Manhattan, right across the river, or Berkeley, California, just across the water from San Francisco? It's just completely different places, and environments inside their own families. Donald's father, wealthy, powerful, incredibly intense about what a special family he was creating. He talked about them like racehorses, thoroughbred family, he would say, and the imposition of the idea of winners and losers, and just hammering young Donald with that. And Donald, who had a behavior problem, throwing birthday cake, knocking over kids' blocks. At the same time, his father was insisting that he learn the business and become, who Donald Trump became, as opposed to Kamala, growing up in the heart of liberal America. People used to call Berkeley Berserkly, and there she was, her parents seriously into protest, into the anti-war movement. Being raised because of her skin color as a biracial little girl, being raised as a black girl so that she could learn to survive, according to her mother, in a world that was racist and unwelcoming to black children. Could it be any different than that?
On that note, with the former president, you document his journey as a businessman and this theme of winning at all costs. How did that shape what we would eventually see in his political career?
Well, in almost every case, the second most important ingredient is with that winning philosophy, he then bumps into or comes across attorney Roy Cohen, who's a legendary a lawyer in American history because of the Army McCarthy hearings and other hearings in Washington, the anti-communist hearings in the early 50s in America. Roy Cohen, an unbelievably notorious and outrageous figure himself, took the winning philosophy that Donald had, embedded in himself and said, you can win anything. Even if you lose it, if you claim you've won, you can win. And you got to hit people right between the eyes with it. And that's been Donald Trump's philosophy. It's stood up in 3,000 or 4,000 lawsuits inside the state of New York when he was a developer, all the way up to election night in 2000 when he refused to believe that he had lost the election to Joe Biden. That feeling is what engendered that determination is what he and unwillingness to give up is what led to January 6th and has led to his efforts now to try to get reelected, and the love and devotion of millions, tens of millions of Americans, because he just doesn't say no.
In the minute that I have left, you obviously document Vice President Harris's rise as a litigator, her journey as a prosecutor, but you do talk about the personal relationship she had with the former San Francisco mayor. Did you struggle with how much to sort of focus on how that relationship impacted her success?
We didn't really, because people have relationships in their lifetime. We obviously investigated whether there was anything untoward about it, couldn't find it. And I don't think anybody's really making any allegations that there was anything, illegal or unprofessional about it.
Michael Kirk, we thank you for your hard work on this project, for your reporting. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Frontline's documentary, The Choice 2024, Harris versus Trump, is now available to stream online, and you can find it on WGCU's social media outlets. Coming up next, with so many Americans so politically divided, can both sides come together for civil discussions? Hear from a professor who says finding common ground is vital to our democracy. He gives advice on how to agree to disagree. Plus, we stand with Americans' newest citizens as they take the oath and pledge allegiance to the flag. That's coming up on Southwest Florida in Focus. Conspiracy theories, disinformation, and highly charged arguments have left us feeling divided as a country politically. Can people on opposite sides come together for constructive discussions? Well, I recently spoke with Professor Dr. Nolan Higdon, who co-authored the book, Let's Agree to Disagree, a critical thinking guide to communication, conflict management, and critical media literacy. Here's what he had to say about building bridges in our society. Dr. Higdon, welcome.
No, thank you for having me.
So the description of your book says that democracy hangs in the balance in this age of divisive discourse and disinformation. So clearly this country has lived many moments where we've been extremely politically divided. Is this time that we're living different?
I think so. And it is true that we've had many times where we've been divided. I mean, obviously a civil war comes to mind. But I think what's really new about this era is a lot of the media and technology that we have make it very different. Information can travel much further and faster, which is something we admire about the 21st century. But it also means false information can travel further and faster. And so people who create false information can now reach audiences much faster, which means people can believe information much quicker and act upon it much quicker on a much larger scale. So I think the issue we have today, as opposed to earlier generations, is just the scale of information that's out there.
So you blame media for a lot of our political polarization. How so?
I think they contribute to it. I wouldn't solely blame media. I think there's definitely some of the political class that also engages in divisive behavior, and voters, quite frankly, who vote for divisive figures, I think play a role. But media, I wouldn't necessarily indict all media. There are great journalists out there doing great work, and journalism is essential for democracy.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of news outlets have found ways to keep audiences and make themselves profitable by appealing to partisanship. I think this started in cable news. I think legacy papers got involved once they went to subscriber models on the internet. They want to capture those subscribers and keep them. I even think a lot of independent news media figures now online are experiencing audience capture. They want to report what keeps their audience. They don't want to report things that alienate their audience. And a great example of this was the Dominion lawsuit, where Fox News had claimed the 2020 election was stolen, and they blamed this company, Dominion. Dominion sued them, and thanks to the discovery process, we found text messages where Fox News personalities knew the election was not stolen, were mocking people who believed it, but they kept having guests on that said it was stolen because that's what their audience wanted to hear. And I think that's a prime example of a lot of the problems in today's media, is that they gravitate toward that profit or audience capture and not truth.
So you essentially travel the country teaching critical media literacy. What does that mean? And what is your advice to all of us as we all, we're trying to get informed about what's happening on the issues so we can vote for the right candidate? What's your advice to all of us?
Well, critical media literacy is about teaching students how to think, not what to think. It's different than other media literacy that might say, like, don't use the cell phone or don't use the internet. That's not critical media literacy. Critical media literacy is about giving students the skills and perspective to evaluate media for themselves and decide what relationship they want with media. So maybe they don't want social media, maybe they do. That's up to them to decide. But what we teach them is to ask questions. So who owns the media outlet? What messages are they sending? What messages are they not sending? Who do these messages benefit? Who do they not benefit? What sort of conflicts of interest might exist between the message being produced and the message sent? So those are the type of things we just teach students to do. Ask questions, be more critical of media. I think too often we think of things like films or doom scrolling on the internet as some passive activity we do to waste time. Actually, you're getting messages, you're getting knowledge, you're getting perspective in that. And so you should have your critical brain on asking questions about, is what I'm hearing true? Is it false? What else is missing? Things like that.
How do you, advise students, or any of us really, when, we all have our trusted news sources, does it leave people saying, well, who can you trust at this point?
I think looking at the news source is obviously very helpful, but I encourage audiences to interrogate everything. So look at who owns that news source. Is it government funded? Is it privately funded? Is it foundation funded? How might that impact their message? But even if news outlets have a history of, say, getting things wrong from time to time, like New York Times famously bumbled some of the reporting on weapons of mass destruction before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, that's not to say the New York Times, everything in there is false. They also do really great reporting. And so I think another piece of the puzzle is not just following particular outlets, but following particular journalists and personalities who consistently get things right, who consistently gravitate toward truth and fact and not necessarily partisan proclivities. So by identifying those individuals and following them around, I think you'll be a more responsible news user.
So in your book, Let's Agree to Disagree, you're really trying to foster this idea of constructive dialogue across the country. How do we do that when a lot of us believe that people, I'll say on the opposing side, have beliefs that they believe are harmful to this country, or that they believe in policies that they think will hurt this country?
Well, I think engaging with people on a human level is really what we emphasize in the book. Democracy necessitates communication, and even people I disagree with, in a democracy, we all get a vote, and as part of that voting process, if someone's voting one way, it affects me. So it's my job in a democracy to work 24/7, to try and convince people to support the policies and perspectives that I have. And I think we've lost that in this country. We found ways we can block people or censor people we don't want to talk to. And all that does is further put us in these bubbles of reality. And so I'm asking for folks to do something a little more radical. Engage with people you disagree with. Don't lecture them. Listen to them. Share evidence you have. Ask them to share evidence. Maybe you'll find out they don't have evidence, or maybe you'll change your mind. Who knows? But finding people on some human, decent level, you can do a lot of good. Now, having said that, there are some folks who are hateful. They're not willing to engage with you respectfully. And if you're unable to set boundaries with those folks, then a constructive dialogue is impossible with that particular individual. I would encourage you to use your energy elsewhere. Put it into someone who is willing to engage with you in a good faith discussion.
So I've heard you speaking on a couple different platforms, and one of your consistent themes is that democracy is a 24-hour job for all of us. What do you think that job is for us all as individuals?
Well, I think that job is to keep yourself as informed as possible. That means looking at news, investigating news, talking to people with different viewpoints. I think it also means engaging with other people in the electorate. And I know a lot of folks say that that's a lot of work. You know, got to read news every day, got to talk to people every day. And I remind them it is a 24-hour a day job, but they're in luck. If they don't want to do all that work, there are authoritarian regimes who are looking for people who don't want to do anything.
You talk about how despite the media landscape right now, that you're still optimistic. What are you optimistic about when we are so politically divided?
I generally get the sense there's a hunger for democracy in this country, and I think people are exhausted by the partisanship. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people, and they ask what I do, and they say, oh gosh, I don't pay attention to politics. It's just two sides squabbling at each other. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. We've seen surveys as well. I think there's a hunger for constructive dialogue and democracy. And I'm really infused by what I see like a lot of young people doing right now. They're creating alternate media and alternate narratives. And I think they're putting pressure on some folks in the establishment to think about things in different ways. And so I'm optimistic about the future for those reasons.
And I assume you would say that we're not as divided as we think we are, or at least the majority of us are not.
Yeah, I read about this extensively. Because so much of our news media puts everything in a red versus blue frame, we see everything as red versus blue. But the reality is we don't disagree on that much in a lot of cases. A lot of news media tends to focus on things that are divisive, where there are things that we agree that just don't get a lot of attention in news media. And so I think we often think we're more divided than we are. And that also is compounded by a lot of these opinion writers and talkers who they know they keep their audience by confirming their bias and attacking a caricature of the other side. So we increasingly see the other side as something they're not, and I think it messes with our brain and how we think about talking to people.
Dr. Higdon, we really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
WGCU recently witnessed democracy in action as nearly 30 immigrants became new U.S. citizens. Our culture and connections reporter Elizabeth Andarji was at the federal courthouse in downtown Fort Myers for the life-changing ceremony.
Sarin Brunet, an immigrant from Colombia, stands on the sun-baked steps of Fort Myers Federal Courthouse. It's 93 degrees on a Friday, and she's surrounded by friends, family, and 27 fellow immigrants. After 20 years, her citizenship ceremony is moments away.
Well, I came here when I was 4 years old. I'm 30 now. So many years. Many years. Over 20.
The ceremony begins with the St. Lutheran School Choir singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Guest speaker Michael Sachan addresses the crowd.
To all of you sitting here today, you are at the threshold of the same journey. You faced your own challenges, overcome your own obstacles, and today you stand ready to begin a new chapter as American citizens. I congratulate you on your perseverance and courage. Today is a day of celebration.
28 new citizens line up to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
and received their certificates. Brunet shares her enthusiasm for what comes next.
I want to vote. I want to vote. I'm so excited. This is going to be my first time voting, and I'm really, really excited that that's something I can be able to do now. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
When asked about her voting intentions, Brunet doesn't hesitate.
Of course, Donald Trump.
Brunet's son, Moises Motato, was born in the United States, but vicariously lives through his mother's joy.
She's always been working hard for it every day, and I'm happy for her to finally get what she wanted.
For WGCU News, I'm Elizabeth Andarji.
In advance of the upcoming Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a story honoring Jewish history. And you don't have to be a historian or a professional treasure hunter to know that historical gems can come in all conditions. An old, moldy American flag is now proudly on display in Southwest Florida after people donated thousands of dollars to restore it. That act of generosity stands in stark contrast to the flag's story.
When I looked at it, it just broke my heart, and knowing where it came from and where it was sitting and what was happening to it.
Vietnam veteran Harvey Charter knew he had to find a way to salvage the handmade flag from World War II. For years, it was a point of pride at this American Legion post in Fort Myers. But when Hurricane Irma damaged the post's roof, water seeped into the flag's frame, causing mold.
That's a treasure, and it belongs in a place where it will be safe with the temperature for light and everything else, as well as being able to be shared with future generations.
Shared because of the hands that created the flag.
It was made by the inmates of the concentration camp using pieces of cloth that they had. They actually made that right under the nose of the Nazis. So they made it there and risked their lives. They would have been killed for that, for anything. And they did that.
It is truly one of a kind.
When Cody Rodemaker, the curator at the Holocaust Museum and Cohen Education Center in Naples, got the call from Harvey asking for advice, he knew the damage could be severe, but he suspected the Holocaust relic was special.
There have been a handful of flags made by the survivors of concentration camps and given to by liberators, but every single one of those is truly unique.
Prisoners from the Nazi concentration camp in Nordhausen, Germany, made it for U.S. troops who arrived on April 11, 1945.
The Germans had left. The only ones left were about 350 very sick, emaciated, scrawny, near-death prisoners of war.
The Polish-speaking prisoners presented the flag to 27-year-old First Lieutenant John Spain. John Spain Jr. says his dad cherished it.
I think what it really meant to him was, in spite of all the death that surrounded these individuals, that by using the stars, the five-pointed star was converted in their minds to a six-pointed star, which was the Star of David. And I think what that meant to him is, in spite of everything that these prisoners had been through, they were dedicated to their religion, their faith, and above all, they knew it was the Americans that would be liberating them.
Despite being injured the very next day in battle, First Lieutenant Spain kept the flag safe for more than 4 decades until he donated it to the American Legion post. As a Jewish American, Charter knew he had to have the flag restored professionally. He spent more than 2 years raising $10,000 to have it preserved.
The material was going to start to decompose. It wouldn't be here in 5 or 10 years. It would have been gone.
Months later, a crowd celebrated the unveiling of the restored flag at the Naples Holocaust Museum.
2, 3.
I look at it, I think of John Spain Sr. I could see him in heaven looking down, because this is really where he wanted it to be. There was no Holocaust Museum when he donated it to the American Legion.
I couldn't be more proud of the fact that it's finally arrived at a permanent home where it will be viewed by generation after generation.
While John Spain Sr. died before seeing his flag showcased, he returned to Nordhausen in 1999 with his son. A place where he had experienced so much horror now honored him.
I was fortunate that my dad was able to relate to me the atrocities that he witnessed, and kind of goes with the phrase that we should be saying today in this country: let us not forget. Let us not forget what these people endured, almost 6 million lives. So my father was probably the greatest man I've ever known in my life. This is truly the right place. My dad would be absolutely thrilled. I think he's here in spirit.
And the Nordhausen flag is on permanent loan to the Naples Museum. It's on rotation with another treasure, a quilt created by the survivors of Auschwitz who gave it to the Soviet soldiers who liberated them. Well, that is all for this week's Southwest Florida in Focus. Join us next week when we go in depth to investigate Florida's vote on recreational marijuana. What will approving that constitutional amendment mean for local businesses, medical users, and even law enforcement? We'll explore those angles and much more next Friday. We'll see you then. Have a great week.